Hello, hello, welcome everybody. Monday afternoon after daylight savings. I hope everyone has their second cup of caffeine, if that's your thing. So I have Blake Thaxton here with me. I'm Rachel Clark, the development director at CFSA, but I also am a grower. So there's a dual advantage to be working here and hosting this workshop today. So we are doing vegetable variety selection for Carolina growers. I encourage you all to please use the chat right now and just chime in of who you are and where you're tuning in from. That'll be helpful for us to get to know who's here. And Blake has a presentation for you all, and he's going to be taking breaks throughout the presentation to address some questions, and we will also have questions at the end. So thank you all so much for being here, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to Blake.
All right, I appreciate it, Rachel. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all on behalf of Johnny Selected Seeds. Kind of an interesting situation. We set up this presentation, and I have since left Johnny Selected Seeds to work for the Alabama Farmers Federation. But I agreed to do this presentation for Johnny's just because they didn't have anybody in place at the time, and I really do believe in Johnny Seed. I think it's a great company, and wanted to make sure you guys were able to get the great information from about selecting varieties via Johnny Selected Seeds. So my name is Blake Thaxton. I am formerly Johnny Selected Seeds sales rep for the Southeast, and now director for horticultural crops and for the Alabama Farmers Federation, and also the Alabama Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association executive director. So changing roles a bit, but I'm passionate about vegetable production, and hope this information will be helpful to you. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the presentation, and I want to pull up. I believe we can see this. Rachel, can you maybe just chime in, make sure that you see the presentation?
Yep. Yeah, I just brought it up on the screen so we can see your starting slide.
All right, perfect. Awesome. Okay. So like Rachel said, we are going to discuss vegetable variety selection for Carolina growers. There's a lot that goes into that, and we'll get into that quickly. But real quickly, just an overview about Johnny Selected Seeds. Johnny's is an employee-owned company, started in 1973 by founder Rob Johnston, and he sold the company to the employees beginning in about 2010 is when that transition began to start. And he served on the board until just, I think it was about 2 years ago that he finally fully retired. So he's obviously had a huge impact on that company. But now it's owned by the employees, which is just a really awesome concept and gives a lot of ownership to the people working in the warehouse, on the research farm, the sales staff, the accountants, everybody involved. And just from my time there and my experience, everybody cares greatly about the customers. And I couldn't say enough good things about the people that work at Johnny's. They offer vegetable, flower, herbs, fruit, and farm seed, as well as lots of tools and supplies. I'm sure many of you are Johnny's customers and appreciate all their offerings, and they have a lot of good products available. I think one of the things that sets Johnny's apart and makes it a special company is their variety selection process, the selected part of Johnny's Selected Seeds. And every year they are testing thousands of varieties, looking at adaptability, flavor, performance, disease resistance, looking for those unique color shapes and flavors that market gardeners, direct-to-consumer farmers, wholesale organic growers, all the different customers that Johnny Services are looking for. So they're looking at, they're not just taking the word of the breeder, they are actually planting these out in the field, looking at them, and making sure that they live up to the hype and live up to the standards that the Johnny's customer expects. So it's a really neat part of the company, and they do such a great job on that portion. What do you expect when you order from Johnny's? You should expect phenomenal germination rates. They have their own requirements that exceed the Federal Seed Act requirements, and they test constantly on a rotating basis. And that's why you should get seed that germinates really well. And if you don't, there's that 100% satisfaction guarantee. You can call into the call center, call your sales rep, and tell them what's going on. And if it's reasonable request, they'll probably replace your seed or refund you. Same day shipping should be expected. As many as you know, over the last couple of years, that hasn't been as much of a guarantee as we'd like it to be, but it's still relatively a good guarantee. And this time of year, I'm not involved right now at this time, but I suspect that it is same day at this point and will continue to be for a while now. The last January, February, we really ran into some issues, and I can say with confidence that those issues would have been worse if Johnny's hadn't made some upgrades to their warehouse management system. And so that warehouse management system has allowed for Johnny's to stay as close to same day shipping as they can. And last year, you might remember that there was a situation where they had to cut off home gardeners for a little while to service the commercial grower. So Johnny's knows that the commercial grower, you are their priority, and they're going to keep that in mind moving forward. Johnny's also has phenomenal growing information. You may have seen their catalog before and seen all the great information that they have in the catalog. And it really is almost more like a grower's manual than a catalog itself. It has information about every crop that's in there with spacing and whether it's direct seed or transplant or whatever it may be. It has all that kind of basic information. And then you can dive into the grower's library online and really get tons more information. It just keeps going deeper and deeper, and it's hard to find the bottom. So there's just lots of good stuff. And just with Johnny's, there's over 100 new products this year or this coming year for 2022. Then 2022 products are on the website and available. So you might check those out now. You might start getting catalogs. You may have got it already, or you're going to be getting it in the next few weeks, and you'll see these new products. Some of those products may not be available right now because the seed hasn't come in, but some of them will be available now, and you'll check those out, start shopping now. So to the task at hand, what to consider while selecting varieties. There's a lot of different things we ought to consider. In the South and the Carolinas, you got a lot of different challenges that present themselves. It's just not always the easiest place to grow. We have a lot of humidity, a lot of heat, and all those, and both of those combination. If you ever study pathology or pathology, you talk about the disease triangle, and you have to have in the triangle, you have one side is the host. You have to have a favorable environment, and then the last side is the pathogen. So you have to have all three sides of the triangle for these things to happen. And we happen to make up a really good triangle at times in the Southeast and in the Carolinas. So you need products, you need varieties that are adapted to the environment. And then you also have different production systems that we use, whether in the field, in the greenhouse, whatever it may be. You want varieties that are adapted to that production system, because you'll have different problems in the different production systems. Disease resistance. You want to find products that are resistant to the diseases that occur most often and are likely. Some we can just expect in the Carolinas. You want a product that yields well. You want, if it doesn't yield well, you better be able to command a very high price for it, because you won't have very much of it to cover your production costs. And then marketability. We don't want something that is just exactly what you can find from a wholesale venue in the grocery store or distributor. You want to provide something unique that the consumer wants to buy, that is different than what they see everywhere else, or something that is the same that they see everywhere else, but there's other qualities that make it desirable to the consumer. So first, let's just talk about adaptability briefly. and the environment. Planting dates are kind of interesting. Like even when you look at the Johnny's website, you may see information on planting dates that you kind of have to translate for the situation in the Carolinas. Just because a crop may be planted in New England in June doesn't mean it should be planted in June in South Carolina. Just because it should be planted in April in coastal South Carolina doesn't mean it should be planted in the same time frame in the mountains of western North Carolina. So you have to really pay attention to planting dates and the adaptability of the different crops. You can really find out a lot from talking to other growers in the area that will help with your planting dates. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes I see in new growers and also home gardeners is they tend to want to plant products too late when you know that it's already nice and warm and you have no threat of any kind of cold or frost or affecting your crop. But when you do that, especially in like South Carolina, coastal areas, North and South Carolina, where you may get a little more heat earlier, if you wait too long, you can let disease and pest pressures build up and it can really cause problems. So you want to look at adaptability of these varieties, what works well, and then make sure you're planting at the correct dates when you're doing that. Adaptability of production system. We have several different production systems we see often in the Carolinas. Excuse me. One being the field. Obviously, that's kind of the most traditional and most often that we see a production system, basic field production with, whether it's overhead irrigation, unirrigated or drip irrigation, whatever it might be, that is one production system. Also, the greenhouse. In greenhouse, when I use the term greenhouse, I'm typically talking about a greenhouse that has active cooling and heating. So it has a fan and evaporative pad cooling system, drawing air through the greenhouse with a fan through a wet wall, as they call it sometimes, or a swamp cooler that has water flowing through the wall and the air comes through there. The heat is removed by the water and it provides a cooling effect to the greenhouse. And then you have an active heating source of some sort, whether it's natural gas or liquid propane to heat the greenhouse in the winter months. And then you have more low-tech systems. So these are more and more common where you have a passive cooling and heating system. Basically, your forms of heating is to close down the sides, have removable sides of some sort that you can put back on, and that to heat up the structure. And then the cooling would be to remove those sides, and then sometimes throw over shade to help cool it off that way. And then you can see even more low-tech systems where you have just a shade house for the middle of the summer where there's no plastic, it's just shade over the top. So there's a lot of different ways that you can see these low-tech systems. But you want to have specific varieties that are meant to be grown in these areas. So sometimes we see in greenhouse or low-tech high tunnels that tomatoes that do well in the field don't do as well in those systems because we have leaf mold pressure. Whereas leaf mold is not something we see a whole lot out in the field, but we see a whole lot more in these structures. So you want to make sure you have varieties that are adapted to that specific system. Whereas in the field, you may be dealing with in tomato early blight or late blight, depending on the season. And you might not have that as bad of an issue in a low-tech or a greenhouse system because you're able to keep the foliage dry and away from the elements. So you have to think about the production system and select your varieties based on that production system. Next, disease resistance. I put this photo in the presentation because it clearly shows the effect of disease resistance on a crop. The row we're looking right down the middle, there's one variety to the left and one variety to the right. And this is a fusarium resistant variety on the left and a non-fusarium resistant variety of kale on the right. And you can see that obviously there's fusarium in this field and it's decimating the field on the right, but it's clean on the field on the left and looks robust and is doing well. So you can see the impact of the variety selection in this situation on this field, and you can take that and apply that to your farm. I think a lot of times as direct consumer growers that grow many different crops for CSAs or farmers markets or restaurant sales or whatever it might be, you have lots of different crops, but small production systems. You don't see a large field of kale like this one, but you have, a couple rows of this, a couple rows of that. And sometimes it's harder to pick out the issues when they come because you've moved on as quick as you've started because you have other things to worry about with all your different crops. So I think it's really important to keep records and know what kind of diseases you're dealing with so that when you do variety selection the next year, you can really target those diseases and have resistance for those. Just a few that I hear about from growers in the Carolinas are late blight, fusarium, black rot. There's many more, but those are ones that I've talked to growers about: late blight in tomato, fusarium in kale, black rot in brassicas. And you can, those are ones you might consider if you're having issues in those crops, but also just know that you can send off samples to pathology lab with NC State or Clemson or whoever it might be, so that you can really identify these problems and then use your variety selection to help combat that. So you don't have to use any kind of organic pesticides or conventional pesticides to try to protect them as much as if you just had that genetic resistance already bred into the crop. Excuse me. Yield is another one that I think is very important, but it's also some of the hardest information to find, unfortunately. And so I think doing your own trials can be very helpful. These don't have to be very large trials, but some small, strip trials in your fields will help you. If you monitor, 20 plants or something like that with very specific data, then you can really identify what's giving you the best yields. But you need, yielding well is always important, so that you have more crop to produce marketable products. So you can also look for this data in extension websites. Call your extension folks. There is information out there. It's just very difficult to find, and then it seems like it's even more difficult to find for sustainable and organic production. So just be careful in what you find on that kind of information, but you can find some good baseline data that will help you. Just make sure it comes from a reliable source and a source that is somewhat close to your area that would have a similar production style. Another one would be marketability that we mentioned earlier. I think this is probably one of the more important parts, and this is a part that Johnny's really focuses on and tries to distinguish itself from other seed companies. They look at flavor, and flavor is difficult because flavor can be subjective. For example, you see the photo, the tomato. I personally cannot distinguish tomato flavors greatly. If it's a really sweet tomato, I know I like that, but if it's a real acid tomato, it just tastes like a tomato to me. So whereas other people's palates are very refined and they can distinguish on tomato the different flavors. So you have to really be careful on how you do go about selecting for flavor, but that can be a big marketing point if you have very flavorful products. Quality is another one. How long is it going to hold? Can it hold for a long time, or does it have a very short shelf life? You have to balance those things, and depending on your market, you can go about that. We're kind of talking shipping considerations in the same light. And then I think a big one is uniqueness. You see the tomato on the screen. That's the Gin Fizz. It obviously is a very unique look with that pineapple type tomato. People love that kind of stuff. It's different. It's got an heirloom look and feel, and that's what people want. And so if you can find products that are unique, but not too unique in that you are limiting, some people just want their plain old what they're used to. So you have to kind of balance that, but there is room for uniqueness out there. So before I go through some of my top varieties, I did want to open it up. If there were some questions that I could answer so far, let me look through here. Do we have any questions yet?
I don't see any questions yet.
Okay.
Folks have kind of chimed in on where they're joining from, and so no specific questions yet.
Okay, awesome. Then we'll just keep on going. If you guys do have a question, just go ahead and throw that in the chat, and we'll try to get to that right away. But I'm going to continue on. Rachel, we see my presentation on the screen again?
Sure do.
Okay. All right. Let's keep going then. Next, I want to go through just kind of some of my top personal favorites for the Carolinas, and I'll give some details on why I like these. First, I'm going to start with, like we kind of went through those different specific things we need to consider when we're selecting varieties. This specific scenario is high tunnel tomatoes. So I'm gonna go through which varieties I like for high tunnels and why. So first, the photo you see on here is BHN 589. I know it's not a sexy name, and you could market it as something else, but it's a red sliced tomato. It tastes wonderful, and it happens to do really, really well in high tunnels. It is a determinate plant, although, so it's a bush type, not a vine type plant, although it is semi-determinate, so it grows a large bush. And I really like that for tomato, or for high tunnels. Some in the deep south, sometimes I personally, this is from my own opinion, sometimes we try to mimic what we see in other regions of the country. And a lot of times we see in high tunnels vining, indeterminate type tomatoes that we lean in lower. In a lot of the Southeast, we do not have as long of a production time for tomatoes in a high tunnel as they do in some cooler parts of the country. For example, in New England, they're going to plant their tomatoes probably in May, and then they'll pull them out in September, at the end of September, when they start getting their first frost. So they have one fairly long production time. We kind of in the South, I'll give a caveat that the mountains of Western North Carolina are more similar to New England than most of the South. So especially moving east into the Carolinas, you kind of have two distinct production times for high tunnel tomatoes. You have one in the spring, your early spring crop. You may go in February with your transplant, and then you kind of are petering out when it starts getting very, very hot in the middle of the summer. And then you also have your fall time that you could plant, although it may be more challenging because the disease pressure and insect pressure will be much higher. And then you may plant in late July, early August, and you go well into the winter, as long as you can keep them from freezing. So I like determinate plants because determinate plants really produce a lot of fruit in a short window, whereas a indeterminate plant will produce a lot of fruit over a longer period of time, and it's just going to give you a little bit as you go. But for that short production time frame, I think the determinant really is nice. And that BHN 589 grows a taller plant, so you can get more out of it if the weather is doing well, and you can go longer and to keep set fruit in the summer. You can keep going, and so that's just a really nice one. We've seen it do well in trials where it out yields others. Likewise, BHN 968 and Gold Nugget. Let's see if I have a picture of those. So here's Gold Nugget. BHN 968 and Gold Nugget are determinate cherry type tomatoes. So Gold Nugget being yellow, and then BHN 968 is a red. And they're both determinate. So again, it's very unique to have cherries that are determinate. I like the idea of planting those in high tunnels, again, for the shorter window. Maybe not the best selection for the mountains of western North Carolina, but for the other areas of Carolinas, these would be good ones to consider. Next is Grand Marshal. I don't think I have a photo of that one. I do not. So Grand Marshal is another one that's just a red slicer, similar look to what you see in the BHN 589. The reason I put that one is for if you have tomato yellow leaf curl virus problems, and you may have this in the coastal areas of the Carolinas. If you have high white fly pressure, this could be a disease that they carry, and it has resistance to that. So that's one to consider there. Also, Mar Noir. If you're familiar with Marnero, this is kind of the next generation of Marnero. The thing I really like about it for our southern growers is it doesn't have the day length sensitivity that Marnero has, which makes it very challenging for southern growers to grow in high tunnels because they want to start it earlier. So Marnero is a good one to consider for that. It also has some resistance to tomato yellow leaf curl virus, which we just talked about with Grand Marshal. So that's something to consider for this one as well. And then the last one is Gin Fizz. That was on the previous slide. You see here on the left. I just put this one in there because I really like it. I think it's a beautiful tomato. I think it tastes good. And it's indeterminate. It's like Marnero and Mar Noir and all those, but it's at a much better price point. So that's another reason to consider it. It's organic seed. I've seen it do well in high tunnels, so it's one to consider. Next is top lettuce varieties for the Carolinas. I always start with the Salanova varieties. It seems like people are either totally sold on Salanova or they don't think they're worth it because their price point, because they are very expensive. But I will just throw out there that you won't find anything more consistent. They grow so consistently. Really not even dependent on the environmental factors. They do well in heat, which is nice for Carolina growers. And they have that one cut capability. So I would definitely recommend Salanova as a good place to start if you want to do lettuce. Also, Muir. Muir is the most heat tolerant lettuce that we carry. Muir is, I thought I had a photo of it. Muir is a summer Batavia, green summer Batavia type. It will tolerate heat the best. It doesn't tolerate all heat. If it's, early August and 100 degrees every day, it's probably not going to do well. Excuse me. So also, you're not going to find another lettuce that probably does better than Muir in that situation. But this one is going to tolerate heat the best. And then Monte Carlo is just a beautiful romaine. It seems to tolerate heat the best of a romaine, although romaines do not tolerate heat very well. And it's a medium size. It's not super large frame, dark, glossy green leaves. Just a beautiful lettuce. Here's one of the Salanovas that we came out with, I believe it was spring 2020, in Salanova Green, Batavia. These Batavia types have been super popular. They seem to have larger frames than a lot of the other Salanovas, which I think our customers really like. So something to consider if you want to go with a Salanova and you want that larger frame, the Salanova Green Batavia would be a good one to start with. Top salad greens for heat in the Carolinas. Charbel is one that, well, let me start with the Darkita arugula because that's what the photo is. Arugula is just a good green to pick in general because of, or in heat because it tolerates the heat very well. You will have some bolting, but it does tolerate heat really well. This Darkita is interesting because it kind of has a wild look, but kind of an oak leaf look. But it's a more mild flavor than the wild types that you see. So that it would be a good one to look at. Charbel chard, originally bred for baby leaf. Swiss chard has good Cercospora resistance, and those are the kind of disease with the yellow lesions that get on the leaves that you see commonly in beets and Swiss chard. And charbel, we grew it at Johnny's, and we actually liked it as a full size as much as we liked it as a baby. So you can grow it as a full size or a baby. And I've gotten reports out of Florida actually that it does very well in heat. So that's one reason I included it on here. And then KX1 kale. This I saw KX1 red Russian kale, and then the Johnny's calibration mix in high tunnels in Florida in June. And it was 95 degrees outside, and this stuff just looked beautiful. So I would highly recommend growing this for a green in the hot times of year. You can see is that brilliant red, green petioles creates a lot of loft in a mix, and it's just really, really nice. You can pair it with the red Russian, which is more of a green leaf kale that's similar shape and growth rate, and you really have something there if you're looking for a kale salad. All right, let's stop there. Any questions now? I'm just looking over. Oops.
All right, we do have a few questions that have come in. Let me scroll back. One question came in: spinach varieties for bunching. I don't know if you have spinach coming up or not.
I do not. I didn't do spinach. For bunching is interesting. We had one called Auroch that grew really upright and I think could do really nice for bunching. Spinach is just such a challenge in the Southeast, just even starting at germination because of our warmer temperatures. So it's not one that I actually don't find a lot of my customers growing a whole lot of spinach outside of some very, very experienced growers in North Carolina that do a good job at it. But Auroch may be one to give a shot at just because it's that nice upright habit.
Awesome. Another question came in after that. What are the best practices for growing heirloom tomatoes and avoiding blight?
So I assume you're talking about early blight. You may be talking about late blight. They're both foliage type diseases. I would say the best practice is protect them by growing them in a structure of some sort. So a high tunnel or a greenhouse. Anytime you can keep the foliage dry, it's going to help with those foliage type diseases. Because like I was talking about earlier with that disease triangle, the pathogen on one side, the host on another side, and the environment on the last side. If you can take the environment out, so we take the environment out, then you no longer have the disease triangle, and you can really stop a lot of that kind of stuff. So I've seen situations when I used to work for the University of Florida Extension Service. I would grow tomatoes in high tunnels, in areas where like you would, and if you just grew out in the field, early blight will take over all of it, and I wouldn't ever have to spray in a tunnel just by keeping that crop dry. So that would be my number one practice: is if you could grow in a high tunnel, do that.
Awesome. And just to follow up on the spinach question, Clement, who asked that question, has clarified that that they're in the mountains, so it's not as hot. So does that change your recommendation?
I would still look at Auroch for the bunching. I think that's the one I would look at. And then also, Johnny's has some good resources on the growers library to compare the different spinaches, whether for baby or bunching. I encourage you to look at that and make sure you find the right leaf shape and Savoy or non-Savoy, whatever you want on that. But Auroch would be a good one to look at.
Awesome. And then just a couple comments, all positive things about Johnny's. Happy with the products. And then Larry wrote in that most of the Salanova varieties do well as cut and come again and make the pricing work out better. The color and the texture outstanding in the tunnel or out. Shout out to Johnny's customer service. So
I agree that it seems like a lot of people can make it work when they do the cut and come again. It gets a little tougher in the warmer months, but it seems like most customers are able to get at least 2 cuts. So, and I see I love BHM 589. Me too. So, all right, we'll keep rolling here. Let's keep this thing going, and then I'll stop again here in a minute for more questions if they come in. So now let's go over some of my top disease-resistant varieties for the Carolinas. First, I'll start with the Prospera basils. If you ever had issues with downy mildew, Prospera basils are the top downy mildew resistant material we have found all across the world. Prospera comes from a breeding company in Israel called Genesis Seed, and Johnny's has an exclusive deal on some of the Prosperas, including Prospera Italian largeleaf and Prospera compact. And let me see if I have a photo of those. Yeah, so here's the Italian largeleaf. It's going to give you more of that, Italian largeleaf, the anise flavor. Very, very popular. And this is the top variety that I was selling over the last 6 months for basil. The Prospera organic, the original Prospera, seems like people really like it. It's a Genovese type, but it does get very long and leggy. So you have to decide if that's something that your system can tolerate. The compact is bred more for container growers, but I think it could be tried as well in the field. It's just going to be slower growing. Oldenboer kale, that's what you see here on the right. Oldenboer is what we saw in that photo earlier of the curly kale in the field. It's fusarium resistant. That's why I listed it here. If you have fusarium issues on kale, that field alone proved to me how well it does when under fusarium pressure. So that might be one to consider, or just switching to if you're typically growing winter boar or another curly kale. You may look at just switching to Oldenboer kale or trialing it to see if it's as good, and you have that added resistance, which is some security if fusarium ever did come in. Sakura and Torringina or Torringina, people pronounce it different ways, cherry tomatoes. I listed those. I thought I might have a photo, but I don't. I listed those for leaf mold. If you have leaf mold issues, these are both 2 really good cherry tomatoes, Sakura being red, Torringina being a kind of the orangey yellow color that you might do in a high tunnel or greenhouse to prevent some of those issues. Leaf mold, it can be a really bad deal, really tough disease to get under control, and it can run through your tomato plants really quick. So if you're growing in a high tunnel, you might prepare for that and go ahead and plant these. They are more expensive because they're greenhouse type varieties, but you can kind of expect to, as eventually, if you have high humidity situations, you're going to get leaf mold. Mountain Magic salad tomato. This one is super popular. I'm sure a lot of you are using this, but it is a great late blight resistant variety. And even people who aren't having late blight issues love Mountain Magic just because it's a great producer. So that would be another one to look at, especially in the mountains of North Carolina where late blight can be a real bad problem. And that's where these Mountain Series varieties were bred by NC State. And then Ninja Bell Pepper. If you have bacterial leaf spot issues, Ninja Bell Pepper can be a good variety. It has bacterial leaf spot 1 through 10 resistance. It's the only bell pepper that Johnny's carries that has that 1 through 10 resistance. There's others that have 1 through 3, I believe, but this is the only one with the full resistant spectrum for bacterial leaf spot. So that would be one to consider as well. My top marketable products. So these are products that I just think are really neat and that I think personally I've seen sell well for some customers, and then also that I just really like. So first I'll talk about the Corno de Toros you see on the right here, the Carmen, the red pepper there, and the Escamillo, it's that yellow golden pepper. And these Corno de Toro peppers are interesting. They kind of they're kind of billed as frying peppers, Italian frying peppers in the Johnny's catalog. They're really similar to bell peppers, and the use, you can use them in a lot of the same uses. Obviously, don't have the same shape, but they're a little bit sweeter when mature, and just have a better flavor. But I've talked to customers who basically have just completely gone away from bell peppers because this just provides something that's unique that they can sell to their customers. And most consumers know how to use a bell pepper because it's a common thing in our diets and our dishes is bell pepper. So the Corno de Toros are an interesting one. Let's see what other photo there. So safari squash or zucchini. It's just an interesting looking zucchini. I think it looks nice on a market table with that vertical white striping. It's a prolific yielder and has some spineless characteristics to make it a little bit easier for picking. So just something that you might consider to kind of liven up the squash and zucchini section of your table or CSA or whatever it might be. Anna Charente melon. I grew these in my garden this year, and I just really liked them. I like that they're like a kind of like maybe slightly larger than a softball, so they're very, very kind of small and cute. But with the green ribbing, I just think they're very interesting looking. They would go great in a CSA box. You throw 2 or 3 of those in a CSA box, or on a table. They look different than a normal cantaloupe. But they taste very much like a cantaloupe, very aromatic. I found that they were a little crispier than a cantaloupe I would typically get at the market, and I like that personally. I think some people may want one that more melts in your mouth. I kind of like the crispy taste, a crispy texture, but with still the sugar content that the cantaloupe has. See, I had a couple other things. Cayenne Bravo daikon radish. It's a purple radish that has purpling in the interior of the radish. Very popular for certain markets. Had a customer outside of Atlanta that was growing them for restaurants. I think they store really well, so that's a nice thing. That if you grow a whole bunch of them, you can put them in storage and kind of sell them as you go. And pickled. I think people really like them pickled. So that's something to consider. That purple interior is very attractive. The North Georgia Candy Roaster. I put that on there for this time of year specifically. I am told that it is the #1 pumpkin pie making people use butternut squash and pumpkins, and this is a type of squash. So the North Georgia Candy Roaster, I'm told, makes the best pumpkin pie. So that might be something. It's a long squash fruit. It's kind of unique looking, kind of weird looking, to be honest, but that might be one to add to your table and bill it as the top pumpkin pie making ingredient. So a few things new for 2021 that I wanted to mention. This is Dazzling Blue Kale on the right. It's a lacinato type with that kind of purple midrib, darker green blue leaf. Just an interesting look. Starstruck lettuce mix. So you've heard of a lot of the lettuce mixes that Johnny's has come out with in the past: All Star, Wildfire, Encore. This is just another one in the line of those mixes. This one is all about the crunch. Crunch is in for lettuces, so this one has been selected to be a crunchy lettuce mix, and everything in it is billed to have a lot of crunch at the baby leaf stage. So it might be one you want to give a shot. Winter Blush Kabocha Squash. I actually grew this one in my garden as well. It did fairly well, even with the neglect I gave it. I was pretty busy at the time I was growing it, and I didn't exactly give it the irrigation needs that it needed. But it's an interesting one. I used it as an ornamental for my porch to go with pumpkins for this fall. It's got that pink exterior, and you can see in the picture in the top, you see a little bit of blue streaking. So it's got this kind of baby blue and pink. They gave us asked for names for it. I wanted to name it Baby Shower with the baby blue and the pink, but they never have taken my suggestions on names. So Winter Blush is what they went with, and it's just an attractive kabocha squash. And then this one, just really cool looking Century Star throwback to the old Moon and Stars heirloom watermelon. This is a seedless type, so it's got that rind that has the Moon and Stars look, but it's a seedless type. We trialed it in North Carolina with some growers. It seemed to do pretty well. So I would definitely look at that one to have a unique product on the table or in your CSA box. And then Everleaf Thai Towers. We've had Everleaf Basil for several years. It's a Genovese type, slow bolting. But now we're looking at this Everleaf Thai Towers that we brought on. The Thai Basil, extremely slow bolting, beautiful plant habit. I really like this one when I saw it. I would encourage you to look at this one for sure if you're doing Thai Basil. It's just really, really nice. A huge improvement on the Thai Basil that is currently available. So that's all I have on the presentation, but I do want to open it up for more questions. But before we do that, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you. And also just, if I've worked with many of you in the past, I'm going to be primarily working in Alabama moving forward. So just thank you for the opportunity to work with you in the past, and I wish you the best. And if I can ever help with anything, certainly glad to. And I, encourage you to keep working with Johnny's. I think that's a great company, and they'll serve you as best they can. So, was there any more questions that we wanted to go through?
Yeah, are you able to see, Blake, the questions on the side now?
Yeah, let me.
So where we left off was April, and April, I apologize. I don't know if that's a question or a comment on one of the tomatoes he mentioned. So we're going to go and just make it a question because maybe it'll help somebody. So what would you suggest a good canning tomato for southeastern North Carolina? So
I would probably look at the paste type tomatoes. So, like something like Plum Regal or something like that would be a good one. Any tomato can be canned, but I think those paste types, they have less water content. They're more concentrated. So you can look at all those. The interesting thing is we were kind of like Johnny's had like a shortage of seed for those for the last year. I don't know if that was a COVID effect or what was going on there. If people were looking for, stuff to put up or what. But Plum Regal is the top performing plum or paste type that we carry at Johnny's. I did see a question further up that we maybe didn't get to. Could the Monte Carlo be harvested as a gem lettuce? Um, it could. Gem lettuces are kind of flexible in what people consider a gem. I have seen people market small romaines as gem types, and I've also seen people market bib lettuces as gem types. So I think it's really just depending on. It seems like the gem lettuces a lot of times are being marketed to restaurants and chefs. So you really just want to get that in front of them and make sure they know what to expect. If you are going to grow a Monte Carlo, make sure they know what this looks like before you tell them you're selling them a gem, because it is technically a romaine cost type lettuce. I see suggestions for cucumber variety that's resistant. Excuse me. Resistant a lot of times for cucumbers is downy mildew. The cucumber that I would look at for downy mildew resistance would be Bristol and Citadel. I'm having a hard time remembering right now. One of them's a pickler and one of them's a slicer. Those are kind of the top two downy mildew resistant varieties out there right now. You might look at growing early in the season something that's not downy mildew resistant that you really like the flavor on, and then kind of moving towards the Citadel and Bristol late in the season when we know downy mildew really comes in, because those downy mildew resistant varieties can be very expensive, and sometimes they can lack the flavor that you guys really need for your markets. So I would suggest using like for a pickler max pack or something like that early in the season, and then as you get later and downy mildew pressure comes in, moving to that Citadel and Bristol. All right, ideas on bricks on the Anna Sharon Tay. I have no idea on the bricks. That might be listed on the website. You can check there. And I know that there was an Alabama extension guy that actually did do the bricks on that. His name's Dr. Joe Kimball. So if you want to look up Dr. Kimball and send him an email, you should be able to find that. He's at Auburn University, and he should be able to provide that information to you. I don't know it off the top of my head, or I'd be glad to give that. But it was very sweet, tasted very much like a cantaloupe you would get from the market, but I would say it's crispier. The texture was crispier, crunchier, than not as kind of melting flesh like you get in a cantaloupe. I like that personally. Others may not. And then I see the comment about the candy roasters. They sell like crazy at my market and really stimulate discussion. They're just interesting looking, and I think that's a great thing. I saw a customer in Florida. They kind of did a competition one year and grew some butternut candy roasters and some other things you could use to make pumpkin pies. And then they put it on social media, which one they like the best. And, fun things like that are always good marketing ideas, and can help, really push some of that product. So is there more? I don't see any other questions. Did I miss any, Rachel?
Not that I see. And sorry for the one I missed before.
No problem.
I still don't see it on my end.
Okay.
So yeah, nothing else. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to chat in with just 6 minutes left. But if no other questions come in, I think we can wrap up 6 minutes early. But thank you so much, Blake. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. We appreciate your participation. And yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. And I agree. Thank you for tuning in, folks. And I wish you happy growing.